custom-tailored by artisans. No other aircraft had cradled him so perfectly, and there was no other fighter in the world he wanted to fly. Aside from the feel of it, the gas and oil and metal reek of the muscular little fighter comprised a unique perfume, and no flying machine could match its sleek good looks, a striking balance of purposeful power and aerodynamic efficiency. Righetti looked across the airfield where dozens of other P-51s also sat idling. They waited for his lead. Some of the fighters, like his own silvery aircraft, wore scarcely any paint at all. Their propeller spinners were circled with green and yellow stripes, and the fronts of their engine cowlings wore similarly colored checkered bands. These were identification markings specific to the 55th, but a few of the aircraft were partially painted with a sweeping olive drab pattern that covered the wings and ran back from the engine cowling, and then stretched down the top of the fuselage to the empennage. The unsanctioned scheme accented the aircraft's trim lines and was unique to the 55th. The tails of a few of the Mustangs wore the profile of a rearing stallion on their rudders. Righetti checked his wristwatch against the slip of paper strapped to his knee. It was marked with important particulars about the day's mission, such as the takeoff and rendezvous times, the route, the markings of the bomber units that were to be escorted, and the expected weather, among other important information. The slip was marked with the date, April 17, 1945. It was his 30th birthday, and he reflected for a moment on his wife and young daughter. They would be asleep now, at home near San Luis Obispo, on the ranch where he had been born and raised. The 55th was assigned to escort B-17s of the 8th Air Force's 3rd Air Division across targets in Dresden, not far from Germany's border with Czechoslovakia. In fact, the war was nearly over, and there was little promise of air combat, as the Allies had beaten the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, nearly out of existence. Indeed, the Nazis were expected to surrender or be completely overrun during the next few weeks. It was a time frame that neatly corresponded with the end of Righetti's combat tour, as he had to fly only a few more missions before reaching the 300 combat hours required to rotate back to the States. Regardless, he had been growing increasingly exhausted and was ready for it all to be over. Righetti nodded at Downs, who, careful to stay away from the spinning propeller, ran under the aircraft and dragged the wheel chocks clear. Checking ahead and behind him, Righetti released the fighter's brakes, added power, and rolled from the hard stand onto the airfield's perimeter track. He returned the salute that Downs threw at him and started for the runway. The P-51's nose blocked his view forward, and Righetti stepped on one rudder pedal, then the other, fishtailing the little fighter back and forth across the track so that he could better see what was in front of him. Other aircraft left their hard stands, likewise weaving, as they fell into a long, snaking line behind him. Crew chiefs, armorers, and other support personnel held tightly to their hats and shielded their eyes against the blast of propeller-blown dust and debris. Nearing the runway, Righetti finished his takeoff checks and cranked the canopy closed. The growl of his engine changed timbre to a muted rumble. Behind him he saw the 3 squadrons that made up the 55th, the 38th, the 338th, and the 343rd, readying for takeoff. He checked his wristwatch once more and watched Paul Reeves and his wingman pull past him and onto the runway. Reeves was flying his last mission. "At the briefing, Righetti called me aside," said Reeves, "and told me that I would lead the group, form it, and take it to enemy territory, and at that point he would assume the lead and I was to return to base. He pointed out that we had lost too many guys on their last scheduled mission and that we were not going to lose any more. It seemed like a very thoughtful and considerate thing." A few seconds passed, and a flare arced skyward from the control tower. The flagman posted at the edge of the runway pointed at Reeves's ship and whipped his flag over his head with a dramatic flourish. Reeves and his wingman advanced their engines and started down the runway together. The prop wash from the 2 aircraft rocked Righetti's fighter as he pushed up his own throttle and rolled onto the runway. Carroll Henry, Righetti's wingman, taxied into position next to Katydid, raised a thumb and flashed a smile. The rumble of Katydid's engine grew into a popping roar as Righetti eased the throttle forward. At the same time, he stepped on the right rudder pedal to counter